There is a time for everything, a season for every purpose under heaven, a season to be born and a season to die, a season to plant and a season to harvest, a season to hurt and a season to heal, a season to tear down and a season to build up, a season to cry and a season to laugh, a season to mourn and a season to dance, a season to scatter stones and a season to gather them, a season for holding close and a season for holding back, a season to sink and a season to lose, a season to keep and a season to throw away, a season to tear and a season to mend, a season to be silent and a season to speak, a season to love and a season to hate, a season for hostilities and a season for peace. Holy wisdom, holy word,
thanks be to God.
I've been trying to learn more and more about somatics. Anybody heard this word before? Soma means body, and somatics has to do with practices in our body. As I was learning about somatics, I came across a video on YouTube that was trying to explain how healing can come through our bodies. And it was a video of a polar bear who had been actually kind of pursued by a team of researchers and then shot with a tranquilizer dart, but was awake and conscious of everything that was happening. And so then in the video, the researchers approached the polar bear and began to open up its paws and measure it. They aren't doing anything to harm it per se, but it's an extremely jarring and traumatic experience for this polar bear. And then over time, the tranquilizer dart wears off. The polar bear begins to regain its own control over its body. But the researchers continue to film at a distance the polar bear. And it begins to shake. And it begins to moan and roll in the snow and ice and move through a process of embodied release. And this is one way that our bodies know how to grieve, how to grapple with the traumas that happen in our lives. We see this happen with humans as well, sometimes. For those who perhaps have been in a car accident, but maybe you weren't dramatically injured, and then after the car accident, sometimes our bodies can involuntarily shake, right? Or we're moving through these intense processes where we're making sense. Our mind in an instant has to integrate. So this does happen. You'll find in car accidents. This is what they said in the polar bear video, by the way. That our bodies will shake. We'll have a similar response, a similar somatic response. And it can also happen in little micro ways along the way, too. That we might have stresses in our lives, and the way that our world is built right now, we experience stress, these micro stresses, and because things are so busy and maybe we have a deadline, or we have some responsibility or obligation that we need to fulfill, we set those cues aside and we keep going. And over time this builds up and it builds up and it builds up and it builds up, and we'll see things like the chronic stress having impacts on our bodies, on our health, on our wellness, our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health. This is our 5th week in talking about transformation, this trust in transformation. And it took me a minute before I realized, like, okay, how do we know we're transformed? What does transformation mean, right? Or even, does it mean that we're healed now or that we're whole? What does it mean to be whole? I think that in a lot of ways, actually, life is an ongoing series of striving toward wholeness, striving toward healing. Maybe we find these moments along the way where we have this sense of healedness, but it's like an onion, right? We arrive at this place where we have this deeper self-knowledge or deeper sense of awareness about our community or the world. It unveils a new reality. There's simply more discovery to undergo, more healing unfolds before us. I'm trying to think. In the last 10 years, right, our culture has undergone a lot of change and a lot of trauma. And there's been a lot of new language in this last decade to me, new language to me. And I remember in the first couple times that, probably, if I'm being honest, like the first many times that someone said, well, I just want to show up whole here. Can I show up whole? And I kind of thought, what do they mean? What does this person mean? What does it mean to be seen as whole? I just want to be my whole self here. I think that's often a question that comes from a sense, from a bit of privilege. If I am curious about what does it mean to be whole, what does it mean to have to show up as my whole self, that might mean that I haven't had the experience of having to hide away a part of myself in order to be allowed into a space or accepted. So I think that in a lot of ways, healing is about stepping into being seen. When I think about trauma, right, we think about the polar bear. Most often trauma it's relational. Trauma is mostly relational. The example of the car accident or something happening to us, usually trauma sometimes can come that way, but often trauma comes through, neglect, exclusion, isolation, violence or abuse. These are relational words, even if what they're meaning is an absence of relationship. And so I think that wholeness is about being seen, being loved, embraced, accepted. When we think about transformation I think is about healing, the kind of transformation that we practice in our Christian context. To me, transformation is another word for resurrection. Valerie talked about grief, and about grief as resistance, as Nancy talked about grief as resistance. And in our Christian tradition, before resurrection comes, we move through grief. We begin with I was going to say Good Friday, but I'm thinking actually about Holy Week. We begin on Palm Sunday. There's this heightened march into Jerusalem. But even as there's a triumph, we know that there are fissures and ruptures and cracks beneath the surface. There's a march of those with little coming into a city with much. And a city that's been overtaken by empire and those who are resisting this empire. And then before the end of the week, the leader of this march has been executed. And the followers of Jesus have to grapple with what's next. We have to stay in the grief. And the way that we stay in the grief, as Gibson says, is to be here at the window together, aching for it all together. One way to be here at this window together, aching for it all to get better. Again, an example that Valerie used is fabric. We are able to grieve more fully. We're able to hold it for one another when we hold it together. And we saw this too last week when John shared his story with us. And we held a circle here in the center. And four of us reflected back to John what we heard in his story and how it was reflected in our own selves. Healing is an act of communion. We need each other. In the same way that trauma or pain is most often relational, the processing of grief, which is a crucial step in healing, is also relational. And we can hold it for one another in community. I think sometimes I actually, as we've been in this process, this period of where we've been looking at transformation in particular, and we're going kind of really deep, really close in on different people's stories in the community, right? And sometimes I worry to myself, I'm like, is this too, are we like navel gazing, right? Are we getting too close to each other and not really thinking about the outside world the way that we should? Are we not taking action enough, you know? I think that's fear, speaking first of all. That's anxiety. Of course, we have a responsibility, and we do take specific actions in the world, and we do that together too. But I think that this practice of grief is an important one because first of all, our culture does not know how to grieve. We do not grieve. This isn't a thing that we're taught to do, where there's space. And so I think about fractals. And I end up talking about fractals a lot. What we practice here within ourselves and with each other spirals outward, has an impact on the greater world. We're practicing. When we make space for seeing and witnessing and loving each other, for embracing each other's stories, not regardless, because of who we are, because of the vulnerability that we're bringing, we're practicing how to heal these ruptures and these fissures at a collective level. One thinker, Francis Weller, says it this way. He says, we protect what we love. We protect what we love. We love the earth. We love each other. Who do we love? So we need to know each other to love each other. We need to know each other's stories. All of each other's stories. To be able to see and embrace each other. So when we're doing this in our community at this intimate and communal relational level, we are practicing this kind of transcendent love that has been taught to us by God. Jesus said there are 2 laws, right? 2 guidelines. Of course, I want to say guidelines instead of laws, right? 2 laws that Jesus gives us. Love God, love your neighbor. Love God and love your neighbor. So this is our practice space. I keep coming back also in this time where we're thinking and talking about transformation a lot to the concept of that grief to grievance pipeline that we first started thinking about on Easter. If people remember this or don't remember this, I'll give a little refresher. Now I can't remember the name of the Duke psychiatrist who spoke about this, but he said that collectively, when a group of people experiences grief and does not process it, our griefs turn to grievances. Our griefs turn to grievances. We become calcified in grievance. And then we begin to project onto the world these grievances that we experience and enact out of that grievance. And this psychiatrist, and I agree with him, says that some of what we're seeing in our culture, the anger, the rage, the domination, is about unprocessed grief. So it's really important that we learn how to grieve with one another, that we learn how to hold grief for each other, that we learn how to hold each other's stories, kind of regardless of what the stories are. When someone is experiencing grief, the first thing we do is we hold it. There's space for agreement and disagreement later. And so I want to thank Valerie and thank all of our storytellers, especially in this season, Nancy and John and Tom, for speaking, for having the boldness and the courage to speak to grief, to share a part of who they are, because this is how we love each other. When we say love God and love your neighbor, we know that in order to love others, we have to love ourselves as well. Because we cannot love fully someone who isn't telling us who they are. So we have to love ourselves. And these are symbiotic things, right? It's not like it's linear, like one and then the other. We feel a little bit of trust, then we can take a step, and then we feel a little trust, and we can take a step. It happens together, it happens mutually. And this is how it happens. We have to be willing to say who we are, to share our stories, and also in order to be fully seen. And that's how this happens. And there's a time for it all, right? The writer in Ecclesiastes says, a time for pain and a time to heal. And so grief has its own time. So we don't rush it, but we allow it to emerge, unfold, grow. And we receive what it's offering. Okay, those are a smattering of my thoughts on this kind of messy sermon Sunday. You get less organized sermons when my partner is out of town on the weekends. But I'm grateful for all of you and for the ways that we're taking risks to lean in to the brief, because it does lead us to transformation, and through this we can practice healing. Okay, so often at Salt and Light, we, always at Salt and Light, and I believe at Central as well, we trust that the wisdom of God comes from all of us, not just the person who's standing here at the pulpit like I am this morning. And so this is why we turn to one another in one-to-ones in conversation to be able to talk about what we heard, see where we agree, see where we disagree, see what other insights can unfold. So we'll take about 5 minutes now to turn to a neighbor and share what came up for you this morning as we talked about grief and healing and vulnerability and fractals. Okay? Yeah, and fractals. Yeah. Okay, I'll call you back in about